I was singing the guitar part for Papa Roach and in front of one of my student workers. I supervise college students for my job. And she just goes, Nick, that was the most cringe thing I've ever seen in my life.
You were the most cringe thing. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like you're high quality Doran style beard and all.
That's fair. Singing the guitar part is kind of cringy in general, but singing a suicidal Papa Roach song, guitar lick.
I mean, there's not like a variation of quality when it comes to Papa Roach songs.
Yeah, fair.
There's just so. As we are, going to get started in just a minute. If you're around and can drop a chat, let us know where you're at and how's my volume, Nick?
You sound really good. Voice is smooth. Also, Chris says he's still not able to join.
What's he trying to do it on?
He's doing on his Mac.
Maybe not a high Facebook user from Minneapolis. I don't know what the logic is on which ones are Facebook users or not.
Yeah, it is kind of weird.
Maybe it's if they're in a group or in a closed thing. I don't know. So he used the link.
Yeah. He's getting the thing where it'll show like the little bar that has the event, and then it'll say add your channels, but it won't let him enter for some reason.
Let's see what happens if I click on it on my phone. Look, somebody from Chapel Hill, home of Theology Beer Camp. That's what I'm talking about. So I'm about to join it from my phone by clicking the link I emailed you. Watch this.
Okay.
I don't know if I'm going to turn it off fast because, the sound's going to go nuts. Yeah. Look at this. The other trip is about to appear.
Wow.
Oh, double trip. All right, this one's leaving. How's my experience? I'm going to give it a thumbs up. And then in the notes, they let our friend in.
Let's see if phones don't usually work. Ooh, is it going to work? Come on, technology. That's the screen he's getting. I don't know if it's focused in.
Just hit next. Yeah. All right. Oh, Adam's here. Boom. How did you pronounce it? Terre Haute? I've decided after living in Scotland that I don't know how to pronounce city names. That's right. Theology Beer Camp. Yes, we're going to talk about Rings of Power. It's like the final episode. Isn't that convenient? All these other people think that they're coming for day drinking while doing theology. What I really was doing was getting an audience so we could talk about the last episode of Rings of Power together.
So true. Little Amazon sponsorship. Just kidding. I'm not going to speak that into existence unless they want to give us free Tolkien stuff. I'll take it.
Yeah. Yes. All right. So how's Chris feeling?
He says it says an error occurred. Please try again later.
What is his tell him to use a different internet browser. I don't know. I've used it I've used this thing now 5 times this week and it's worked perfectly fine. And I don't know why random times it does this. And I think it only does it if I'm talking about hobbits. What's that about? What's that about? I blame Sauron.
It's yeah. I mean, he does have the Palantirs, the Palantiri. mess with the magical satellites of Middle Earth.
Yeah.
To corrupt Saruman's mind.
All right.
Ooh, Ottawa. That's fun.
Yeah. So for people that are on the stream, while Nick is, trying to figure out why the internet's not letting Chris jump on, who saw the other dragon show yesterday? What of the people that watched it? What were the thoughts? Because when they decided to make it, I decided not to read the book,
right?
So I could watch and not be comparing and contrasting. I thought it was fun.
Yeah,
like,
I've heard a lot of positivity. I
Yeah.
have not watched it yet, so.
Oh, well, then never mind. Never mind. But if you get on here and there's unwatched Lord of the Rings, then you're really in trouble.
Oh, that will not happen.
Yeah, you'll be in trouble.
Yeah, the difference is I am obsessed with Lord of the Rings, and I love Game of Thrones, but I have not done as big of a deep dive as I'd like to. I've only read the first book.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Edit widgets. All right. So is Chris trying the other?
He is.
Because we can always start, but not if you're going to be staring at your phone trying to help. That's the I don't want to make you double duty here, Nick.
No, and I don't want our listeners to suffer while they're they're watching you like bring out some high quality Tolkien nerdy stuff, and I'm over here like yeah.
You're like, huh? What? Huh? Well,
he said that might have worked, so I think he's going to be.
Oh, that's what I'm talking about. Good, because you know what I have over here?
Tell
my
me.
air horn. Yeah, I can use that when we start. So for everyone that's on, we're very glad you're here. I'm going to hit record once. Well, I hear the ding.
I heard the ding too.
Look at that. The oh no. Oh, there he is. What's up, Chris?
That worked. Different browser, I guess.
All right. Well, here, say something for us for a minute to make sure the sound is all good.
Okay. A big fan of Tolkien. I can't wait.
It's a little delayed on my end, Chris.
Okay. What?
I don't know. The internet sometimes does things.
Delaying, or is there like a reverb or something?
It kind of delays, but then it'll also kind of skip some things that you say. Well, your cough was on time there.
Let's see. Now, do you think would you be having signal issues from there? Like bandwidth wise?
Should be. Oh. No.
Do you have any do you have, sorry, we're interrupting you because it's cutting in and out on you, Chris. Sorry. Do you have like headphones that you could plug in with like microphones? I don't know if that is something you have available.
I don't. Yeah. I'm just going through the history of my list. I don't have any of those.
Yeah, it keeps going. I can't. Now, I have bad hearing to begin with, so I'm not always the best judge, but.
I mean, we could just sit here and look at you, Chris. I mean, the beard is just on point, nice and trimmed up.
Oh, that's yours.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm breaking up. Basically, I'm calls today, and they all was working It should be working. Open. I don't know. Does it matter that I had this page open on another?
Maybe.
I don't think so. I'm trying to think. Says he basically, Trip, I don't know if you heard Chris, but he said that so I'm hearing him, I think, better than you are. He said that he had some calls today that he was using his computer for, and they were working perfectly fine.
Yeah. Okay. Well, hold on. Let's see.
I'm not sure if that or not, but
I wonder too if it could be the same issue where we switch browsers on you, where this is working, but now your mic's kind of not working with the browser.
It could be browser.
Which one are you using?
This is
it's Safari.
Because Chrome was not for to join the stream. I'm not sure why on the Chrome browser. Just use a Palantir. No.
Well, let's try using the other one again, since it lets you in this time, because Safari is the only thing we've had that the company says they have issues with.
That's Chrome. I'm on this too. So that would be really weird if I'm gonna cut the Safari right now. Hope to see you on the Chrome side.
Okay.
Nick, what I have had bad internet. I've done over 1,500 podcast episodes.
Oh, I think we might get him here.
Testing the sound.
Oh, let's go.
Yeah.
There we go.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yay.
Excellent. Whew. I was like, this happened with Tom and Jason, and I'm like, I've recorded 1,500 podcast episodes, and this has happened once.
Yeah.
Like, short of the internet just being bad.
Right.
And I was like, why? The internet just really hates if I talk about Tolkien.
I guess so. Sometimes. Well, it's just there's a lot. We broke the internet with Tolkien.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm gonna hit record, and we can have some fun.
Contrasty. The light's a bit weird in here. Sorry. But,
no, that's perfect.
Okay.
Oh yeah, that's right. The air horn sounds, and it is time for Tolkien Heads, and we are having some fun today because we were given homework. That's right. Chris sent us homework, and that sounds like fun. It sounds like fun. So, Chris, we're excited to have you join. Very excited with that you were name dropping some of my favorite theorists in your talk, and I was like, wow. Let's see if we have a side talking about Derrida and the politics of friendship. More than happy to. Nice. I unboxed my books because I just moved back from Scotland, and I pulled that book out today, and I was like, oh, I was just hearing Chris talk about it. Anyway, so we're going to have some fun. But before we jump in, there's a few questions that we came up with that are important for people to get to know just how your love for Tolkien rolls. Okay. And you have to decide. It's kind of like Kill, Marry, Screw, but the Tolkien version. And it's who do you want to go to Pound Town with at the Prancing Pony? Who do you want to count kills with at the Two Towers? Battle of the Two Towers. And who do you want to be your sidekick on a trip to Mordor? Can't pick Sam.
Can't pick Sam.
Yeah, because it's a cheat code. Because if you allow Sam, everyone says, "Oh, Sam."
Everyone's gonna say Sam, right?
Yeah.
So who would I go to Pound Town with at the Prancing Pony? Was it?
Oh yeah.
That's a great question.
We're talking drink Pound Town.
Oh,
drink. Yeah.
I'm so glad you said that before I started going. Okay.
Well, I mean, it's we're going to
thing,
discuss hermeneutics later, so
yes. I hadn't even heard it in that context of drinking.
Yeah, open up your file of secret fanfic, Chris.
Yeah.
Just release it to the internet.
I mean, I do anyway in my essays. I pretty much do, right? All right. Well, I was going to say Eomer, but maybe I'll stay with Eomer because in both respects of that term, yes, I would love to have
Absolutely.
some.
And are we talking like Carl Urban, Eomer?
We are
Nice,
much so.
nice.
We are, yes. Give me those sort of flared nostrils to get me going. But anyway, okay. Okay. The second one was who would I count kills with at which
the Battle of Helm's Deep.
the battle comes to? Well, I mean, you got to kind of go with who's there, I guess.
Oh, you can bring anyone with you.
Oh, I can bring anyone with me and count kills.
Yeah, John Garth definitely went second age. He was just like, just to let you know how many names I have in my head. John Garth. He was just like,
yay. Yay. So I mean, from oh my goodness. I mean, counting kills it's gonna be really embarrassing because I wouldn't kill anything. So I would be at 0, and maybe my partner in crime would be at 0 too. So we would be. I'll say Pippin, because I can imagine just Pippin and I just smoking some old Toby during the battle and eating some pork and forgetting that the battle's even happening.
That's a tactic.
There you go.
And who do you want to go to Mordor with?
And who would I go to Mordor with? And it can't be Sam. Gimli.
Nice.
Gimli, because he is the poet, he is the courtly lover of the group, and he would be able to sing songs and beautifully describe the caverns of Helm's Deep in such exquisite detail that I would want to hear him tell stories all day long. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so true. I heard someone talk about how the Peter Jackson films really miss out on making Gimli, taking away his poetic diction that he has in the books.
They really do. I know. It's really a shame. It just, make him sort of a comedic character. Yeah.
But, I think you could never do movies that were as good as the books. So you have to do the movies to be their own thing.
I agree.
And how many of the students that sign up and take a Tolkien class found out about it through the movies?
That's right.
And then they finally get to go read it with you.
That's right. A lot of the students that I teach, I've been teaching the same course at UVM, Vermont, since that course, 2002. And the movies were just getting started right back then. And most students said that they learned about Lord of the Rings through their parents. You know what? That's still true. Like a bulk of my students who fell in love with the movies, their parents loved Lord of the Rings. So many of them, they've learned about Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit from their parents. So that's pretty cool.
How did you first learn about it?
I mean, I read the Hobbit, probably like in 1985, around then, right? If not earlier, but probably around 1985, and fell in love with that. And then the Lord of the Rings, and then being a avid ADD player, right? We set our Dungeons and Dragons world in Middle Earth. So we played MERP, right? Middle Earth role playing. And so we MERPed for all of high school and college, and lived in Middle Earth practically all the time. So, yes.
Do you remember what your character was?
Oh, of course. A very, very, very high level mage named Guar, who lived in the eastern map. We have the entire map of Middle Earth, right? And so we lived on the eastern side, where Palando and Alatar, the two blue wizards, where they had roamed. And we carved up that area of Middle Earth into numerous kingdoms. And I had this, you know, and we named everything in Elvish, in Tolkien's Elvish. And so there was a big forest named Tor and Tetra, or Tower and Tetra. And I was like the head wizard of this ginormous forest kingdom of elves. So yeah.
Oh, nice.
Man, some deep cuts. Like I'm just imagining being a college student and being invited to like my first D&D sesh, and I'm coming to your dorm room or your apartment, and there's just this map in Elvish.
Yeah.
Good, dude.
Well, and then I made up my own Elvish, right? I based it. It sounds a bit like Tolkien's, but it's also very much based on sort of Hebrew. But I use Latin as far as the grammar and morphology, right? So I could, you know, say a number of things in the future past and past perfect and subjunctive, and I did all of that, like most nerds.
Oh yeah. Now isn't at least by rumor Dwarvish pretty similar to Hebrew, like in where there are multiple consonants and then the vowel markings determine the word.
You know that you know more than I do then about it. I mean, I've definitely heard that a number of times that it was inspired by Hebrew, and certainly some of the words that Gimli says can remind us of some of the phrases and prayers that are said in Hebrew. I'm trying to remember now. Sorry, I can't pull out. I mean, the word like Adonai comes up. So yeah, I mean, there's so many characteristics of Gimli and of the dwarves that remind. That are sort of inspired, right, by Jewish culture and Jewish language. So
when you were making up those languages, Chris, and doing up your own Elvish and things like that, and making characters and world building in the East with the Astari, the Blue Wizards, like, did that lead you into like doing deeper dives into medievalism, or in Beowulf and things like that, or was it something separate? Or tell us a little bit more about that.
I fell in love with Old English because of Tolkien, right? And Beowulf. I was at that very impressionable age, and it just made a huge impression on me. Tolkien did, kind of almost like a surrogate father, you know. And so I had such deep respect for him and what he did. That I kind of clung to it in a way in my early teen years, so that at 14, when I was asked what I wanted to be, I said I wanted to be a medieval studies professor, and to teach Beowulf. And so I've had that one eye on that goal since I was 14, if not earlier. And it's totally because of Tolkien.
That's awesome. When I was that age, I wanted to teach 19th century German philosophy. It was like, my goal is always to teach a class called Hegel, Kierkegaard, Nietzsche.
Wow.
And
nice.
I haven't done that one yet, but gotten close.
That's amazing. That'd be a great course. Absolutely.
Yeah, well, you just got to find the right people. Be like, look, when I was in charge of the philosophy of religion class at the University of Edinburgh, the volume of Hegel, Kierkegaard, Nietzsche that showed up in the syllabus jumped dramatically.
Nice.
So I find analytic philosophy to be a small form of torture.
But I bring up Kierkegaard's Fear and Trembling when talking about Galadriel, because we'll talk about the sublime, and I will give a little bit of a lecture on the sublime, and the perilously fair, dangerous, beautiful character that she is, and how you could be dashed to pieces by her presence and her beauty. She is very much that type of deity figure.
So one of the questions that I got emailed in, let me see who it was. Andrew asked to hear about how it was you came to be, invested in literature academically, and you mentioned love of Tolkien and connected to Beowulf. But I'd love to hear a little bit more about the origin story about, you have that initial interest as a teenager, but then, initial passion doesn't fuel the finishing of a dissertation. And so what did you discover as you kind of started to peel the onion of complexity for kind of the history of interpretation and all that kind of stuff that kind of continued to energize you and animate your interest in teaching Beowulf and Tolkien?
That's a great question. It is. You know what? I have to say something like similar to Tolkien. I developed a passion for challenges, linguistic challenges, cultural, historical challenges. I liked learning about cultures that were very historically remote and trying to figure them out, to sort of bridge that gap. I was very, very hoping to be able to do that. Linguistically, right? The languages that are just so linguistically challenging, that really make us have to really work on understanding the meaning of a word and becoming intimate with a word over time, right? Needing to know like how it's used in numerous instances across the corpus of Anglo-Saxon literature, and then sort of developing a sort of relationship with those words.
Yeah.
So I that's really the direction, and you're right. Like certainly as you progress and the master's degree almost makes you want to walk out because at that level you're being taught how this is not anything like you think it is. Literature, we're going to deconstruct literature. We're gonna sort of obliterate all your passions.
Yeah.
But if you can get past that hurdle because you still love it deep inside, then you get onto the PhD where someone says, all right, you made it this far, do what you want. Sort of. I mean, sort of. I didn't quite do what I wanted, but now I'm at a certain level. Someone basically says to you, hey, you made it this far, do what you want, because you are obviously interested and have a passion for this and will contribute to the field. And that's a great place to be at finally.
Yeah. In what, so you talk about Beowulf, and I know you also teach classes on Beowulf, and one of the things in that text, not just that it shaped Tolkien and in the whole mythology and such in Middle Earth, but it's a text where there's battles over translations, and then there are battles over the interpretation of Beowulf. And then there's schools of interpretation that then are interpreting it, not going, let's try to figure out what the author intended, but let's read the text, bringing other questions that animate it and such. Those kind of experiences you have, in graduate school, be it, I see it all the time when people go to do a master's in science and religion, and then they realize that it's in science and religion, and science and religion create certain issues, and there's a kind of naivete that's at the heart of our first encounters with any great stories, be it religious ones or like Tolkien or Beowulf, these kinds of things that involve that animate the love. But then there's this whole nother layer that comes in once you realize that no text comes uninterpreted, and there's this whole play of interpretations that can run ceaselessly down. Could you describe what it's like to try to communicate just what's getting itself done in the act of interpretation to students? Because one of the things about Tolkien is when it's done poorly, people just fight as if the goal is to find the one perfect interpretation that J.R. Tolkien would stamp, so that we could all yell at people on the internet about it.
Right. That's right. It's so true. And boy, do they. Right.
Yes.
Oh my God. Yes. I avoid troll battles like immensely. I can't deal. So you're asking me like, how do I, particularly with students, how I kind of convey the complexity of interpretation? Right. Well, first off, I give them a number of interpretations, right? I just taught Beowulf this spring, and I gave them Seamus Heaney's beautiful poetic version, but it's not extraordinarily faithful all the time. That's why it's so beautiful. And a wonderful translation by Roy Liuzza, who's an academic. He's Anglo-Saxon scholar, brilliant, and does a very, very faithful translation and very useful translation for me whenever I want to see the Old English, and I can easily find where I'm at with his translation. But he's not a poet, and that's okay. I think he'd be fine with that. He's not a poet. So Seamus Heaney does a great job with the poetry side. And then, of course, I give Tolkien, who really, really leans into the archaic syntax and diction. And so some of my students really love that and some don't. And then I recently used Maria Headley's translation of Beowulf, which is a more feminist-leaning translation that I think starts with the word bro. And so, you know, the students are reading two of those editions have facing Old English. And so they're like, oh, the Old English hasn't changed. It's still the same Old English. How in the hell did they get different, very different translations and interpretations? And so that just opens up the door for great conversations around choice, you know, and composition. And that translation is in fact composition, and a kind of retelling. Always. It's always a failure. It starts as a failure to accurately translate the Old English. I mean, and you just can't. You can barely do that with modern day German and English or modern day French to capture the essence or the spirit of an idiomatic expression. There's so many things that just fail, and that's okay.
You had kind of talked about some of those expressions in your lecture a little bit. Like, even I feel like there's parallels, especially when you were talking about Sam and when he's at the Grey Havens, and connecting that with some of the homoamory that's present in Beowulf. And so I guess just like, obviously Tolkien was very influenced by Beowulf, and that's why he does a translation, and so much of it is in the Lord of the Rings, and obviously to various themes with this homoamory stuff that you focus on. Like, could you unpack that a little more? Like you talk about it a little bit more in your lecture. Could you whet our appetite further on those connections?
I wish I brought that and I knew you said that you found it. I wish I had gone to my office and brought the drafts. I did not have time to do that in the past few weeks. It's just been busy. But I can certainly talk more about that. And I did want to say something else about, you know, Beowulf influences so much Lord of the Rings and the homoamory there, but also, you know, how we talk about the Cauldron of Story, right? And how these texts sort of are thrown in this stock, right? And then just bubble and boil and disassociate, so that there's little bits of Beowulf in so many instances, in Boromir and in Frodo, in Bard, in The Hobbit, and then something of Beowulf and Hrothgar in the departure scene. Yeah. So I was talking about the departure scenes, and I've studied that a lot. The departure scene with Beowulf, right, when he leaves the Danes after slaying Grendel and Grendel's mother, and Hrothgar's just very intense, beautiful, sort of quiet lamentation. I mean, it's quiet. There's visible signs of it in his tears, and he grabs Beowulf's neck by the neck and kisses him. But we're also told that it's a very secret or private emotion too, that he's not really expressing how he's feeling, and we're told that he's keeping it close to his chest, because I think, as I said, that's a virtue that the poet is giving us. So, you know, there's something about that, about Hrothgar's admiration and love for Beowulf, this man that he absolutely admires and loves. And we can allow ourselves to have that be very amorous as we want, and as erotic as we want. I mean, the text, you know, doesn't, you know, the text has finite number of words, and there is like ultimately a finite number of interpretations. I don't believe in like an absolute infinite number of interpretations. There's just so many words there, at least. But, you know, it does allow for an amorous interpretation and maybe an erotic interpretation, because the language is very hydraulic anyway. Old English, with its burning blood and the longing and the heat and swelling, they often use these types of words. And sometimes they don't use them in erotic ways, or at least it doesn't seem to us that they're erotic, but they might have been. And if you were inclined to be erotic, I don't know, then maybe they were for you back then even. So anyway, so Hrothgar's very sort of heated, burning sort of feelings that he has for Beowulf at this moment. What is that, right? What is that? It's not satisfying. The interpretations that I've found are barely satisfying at all, because I think they miss it, and maybe I miss it too. But I think I get closer, just allowing myself to believe that there is something very incredibly amorous, potentially erotic, right? In that secret longing, because that's what Dordina means in the Old English. Dordina is secret, and damn it, Beowulf knew it. Tolkien knew this because he calls Eowyn Durnahelm, right?
Mm-hmm.
He knows that word means secret or hidden. But anyway, am I off? Have I strayed away?
No, I don't think so. I think, just hearing this, and I think just the applicability, it comes out in the Lord of the Rings. So just talking about Beowulf's influence on Tolkien, how even, your professional work has, on Beowulf has come out in the Lord of the Rings, where fans, obviously there's a huge fan following of Frodo and Sam as gay lovers. And I think that speaks for itself.
Yeah. That's right. It absolutely does. All the fandom and fan fiction. Yes. Right. But if you look at the draft, and damn it, I really wish I had brought it.
Actually, Nick sent it to me, and I sent it to everyone in the class so they could read it before he got here. But it is so good. The number of emails I've gotten since sending is high. So I thought I would just read it so everyone can hear it. It's 2 paragraphs. It's super beautiful. Now, before I read it, so this is just to be clear, it's in an early draft of the Grey Havens. Is this?
Yes.
So maybe set the stage and the story for people that aren't familiar, if they haven't read the end of Lord of the Rings recently.
Oh, if they haven't read the end of Lord of the Rings recently, and the movie here is somewhat faithful, right? So so Frodo is departing, right? He's essentially sort of going to Middle Earth. He can no longer live in Middle Earth anyway, and so he is saying goodbye to his close friends and to the love of his life, Sam. And Sam is saying goodbye to one of the loves of his life. I'm not sure if we'd call Sam polyamorous today, maybe, but he's been torn in two by the fact that Frodo has been there, right? And Frodo says, you can no longer be torn in two, Sam, right? You need to go on for many years, because he does love Frodo so much, and we want a sense of how much. So the scene you're about to read is when Frodo has boarded the boat from the Grey Havens, and he's departing Middle Earth forever. And so Sam is now never going to see his beloved again.
And when they had passed by the Shire, by the south skirts of the White Downs, they came to the far downs and the towers, and looked on the sea, and rode at it. Last to Mithlond and the Grey Havens and the long Firth of Lune. And there was a ship lying at the haven, and upon the quay stood one robed also in white. It was Gandalf, and he welcomed them. And they were glad, for then they knew that he was also would take ship with them. But Sam was now sad at heart, and it seemed to him that if the parting would be bitter, even worse would be the lonely ride home. But even as they stood there and were ready to go aboard, up rode Merry and Pippin in great haste. And amid his tears, Pippin laughed. You tried to give us a slip once before and failed, Frodo, and this time you have nearly done it, but you failed again. It was not Sam this time who gave you away, said Merry, but Gandalf himself. Yes, said Gandalf, it will be better to ride back 3 together than 1 alone. Well, here at last, dear friends, on the shores of the sea comes an end of our fellowship in Middle-earth. Go in peace, and I will not say do not weep, for not all tears are an evil. Then Frodo kissed Merry and Pippin, and last of all Sam, and went aboard, and the sails were drawn up, and the wind blew, and slowly the ship sailed away down the pale gulf of Lune. And it was night again. Sam looked on the gray sea and saw a shadow on the waters that was lost in the west. And he stood a while, hearing the sigh and murmur of the waves on the shores of Middle-earth, and the sound of it remained in his heart forever, though he never spoke of it. and Merry and Pippin stood silent beside him.
Yeah, so beautiful. So beautiful. Yes, so this longing and these sighs and murmurs, I mean, authors use that so often when the environment is sort of linked to the mental environment of a character or the emotional environment of a character. And so, we have the sighing and murmuring of the sea, but that is the sighing and murmuring of Sam's heart here. I mean, it seems quite clear to me. And he stays there well into the night. Yes. And it's just such a powerful moment, right? And then, not to speak of it, yeah, that captures the same essence of the homoamory in Beowulf with Hrothgar, right? This idea that just to kind of hold that beauty close and not to almost blemish it or cheapen it by vocalizing it, right? That's sort of like the feeling you get here, which we oftentimes chastise or laugh at our at sort of Anglo-Saxon our Anglo-Saxon brothers and sisters, because there's a sort of a sense of being prone to kind of keeping their emotions close to their chest. But in a way, I think that we have to really think about the beauty of that too, and how it kind of felt like a virtue. And I do think here this is what Derrida is getting at with that book as well. The politics of friendship.
Yeah, no. I want to dwell here for a minute because as Nick and people that listen to the podcast regularly know that if we get on the discussion of Derrida, these sidetracks are long. Jack Caputo and I did a class on Derrida a few years ago, who's one of his American students, and it'd be hard. It'd be hard for me to get back on track.
Right.
So, but
I agree.
So I had 3 emails today. I sent out that reading this morning. 3 emails with long stories of people who lost friends.
Wow.
And all of them noting how that particular passage resonates with them, especially when set in Tolkien's universe, with this kind of like aching was one of the phrases, but an aching where there is a reservoir of peace beneath it, and these kinds of things, right? Like where and I was just struck, and to me, the first time in that scene, I think of my best friend, the one that my wife is like, you're very like, we called him Uncle Chad because he just was at our house all the time and lived with us regularly. And when he passed tragically, he was the guy that started the podcast with me in 2008. Like that scene makes me think of him. And what is it like when I got asked to preach the funeral, and I don't want to go on a long story and start crying and derail, but
wow.
underneath the politics of interpretation, be it Tolkien or Beowulf or people on Twitter having interesting thoughts about it, is a sense that culturally in the West, we're uncomfortable with masculine intimacy in all sorts of ways.
Yes. Right.
Be it just really good as cis straight kind of guys as possible to anything in between. Like there's this giant spectrum of possibility. And then what does intimacy look like expressed? We're uncomfortable with it and we don't know how to celebrate it, let alone speak it. And I think that's one of the reasons Sam and Frodo's friendship and relationship is so intriguing, because if you read the story, all the things that are unspoken, you fill in because Tolkien's so good.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder, how many of my friends are they filling in the lines like Sam and Frodo fill in? Because I have some friends that every time I read it, I try to I'll write a note and be like, just so you know, if you know that scene when Sam and Frodo are sitting there and Sam is trying to cheer Frodo up and going like, we're in the big songs, right? Like, you give that whole thing, and Frodo looks at him like, oh, it wouldn't be anything without my Sam. And that kind of thing. Like, I want you to know I experience you as someone that loves me and cares for me and supports me and encourages me. And I was like, you're one of my Sams. And, some people are like, Trip, I've never read that book, but I can tell it's meant a lot to you. And others know exactly what I mean. But I there were a number of questions from people that seemed either like are you forcing a binary on things? Yeah. Oh, Sam and Frodo are secretly gay, or they were just best friends. Yeah. And underneath that binary, at least the way I heard your lecture and the way I've experienced those texts is, like, if you have a map and those are the only two destinations for a male relationship, then you're missing the complexity of a lot of them. And I know the names of people best friend's a bad word for it, because I have best friends, and these people, like Chad, was much closer to me than that. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, thoughts. I read all these emails today, and I just was like,
that's great. That's
great. By the way, everyone that shared the stories, I didn't have time to follow up to know if I was allowed to read them, but out loud. But I appreciate everyone that shared them, because that's beautiful.
That's beautiful. And that's exactly it. I walk into my classroom on the day when we have these kind of conversations, and I remember starting one often when we get to this section. I'll just ask my students, hey guys, can friends break your heart? Can a friend's departure leave you brokenhearted? And we start talking about that, right? And that question alone just tears apart all the sort of binaries, right? It's like, well, what are you saying? Like, that you care about a person so much that you would love a friend so much. And when does that when are we comfortable calling that amorous? And is it erotic? And does it matter? And if it's a little erotic or if it's a lot erotic, does it matter? And can we be in love with our friends? Well, I think we are, if we're honest, right? To some degree, but I guess it's a matter of degree, right? But like, it could be a really, like you said, Trip, like a really intense degree of love for our friends. And so what I like about the term homoamory, by the way, is that it doesn't, unlike homosocial, which is kind of diluted, really, then we have homoerotic, which then leans into the eros of it, and homosexual, which really leans into the sex of it. Homoamory doesn't preclude eroticism or sex. It's just saying that it's sort of focusing on the amorousness, right, between men or between women.
I would say one of the emails I got was of a woman and her best female friend.
Nice.
And I think that's one of those things that, at least from her email, and since I didn't get permission to share it, I don't want to say too much, but just like that, she said she's experienced, after she was married and had kids, the second half of life, there's a silencing around intimacy of female friendship.
Yeah, absolutely.
That in college, or, and that kind of stuff, there is this all sorts of intimacy. She was like, I spent as much time cuddling with women as I spent with men, was one of the lines, until I had children. And I didn't know that after I had children, it cut me off from the kind of, the holding of a friend for a long time, or like sharing everything and not expecting the kind of judgment, and so it was just a powerful reminder, right, that so many of the characters, especially the way the Tolkien's universe plays out in Lord of the Rings, are male characters. But when you start to do these kind of queering readings of binaries and assumptions, it actually opens up space for all kinds of humans to acknowledge and recognize ways. If we internalize the scripts that are dominant in our culture, we're actually cutting ourselves off from places of life. Like a very good friend you can have a long hug and cry with, and on occasion say all the unspoken things about how much it matters to you out loud.
Yeah, nice. Yeah. And if we can spend a second on this or a minute on this, there's definitely more we need to say about women and women's connection to other women in the text. And that does require deconstruction at times, or at least requires us to think more queerly and critically about it. I'll think about work by Terry Castle, who wrote The Apparitional Lesbian a while back, Adrienne Rich, who writes about the lesbian continuum, Sarah Ahmed, who writes about queer phenomenology, which begs the question, if there are no men around, can women be heterosexual? If we are in some ways defined by the phenomena of our sort of this, scene of what's around us, are we in fact, sexual at all? Like if you're, on an island, for example, maybe alone. But, are women, are the Entwives, who I read as a total lesbian community, because in my head, in my version, they're not lost. They got lost. These are women who are probably very, very happy with themselves right now, and outside of the patriarchy and male hegemony, and are probably living the life, honestly. And it's interesting because Tolkien would at least know that the word weef, ent is Old English, and weef is Old English. Weef doesn't mean wife; it means woman. So they're ent women. Right? Are they wives? Yes, in the modern English, okay. But Tolkien would have totally enjoyed the fact that weef means woman, not wife. So they're these Ent women who have fled, basically, and the Ent men who are like, we've lost them. But anyway, I enjoy thinking about the Entwives. I'm trying to think more about them and queer theory, but I'm also thinking about Rosie, and her recreation time when the men are not around, or at least Sam is not around, right? And how she would spend her time swimming in the watering holes with the Gamgee family, with the Gamgee siblings. There are sisters and brothers, and anyway, when the soldiers are off to war, it's a very World War I and World War II trope, right? Then the women banded together. So anyway, I could see Rosie quite fine with without her Sam. Anyway,
no, all your examples kind of, because we're getting into like real world applications here, and how even you kind of exploring just the women elements and the lesbian elements of that and things like that. But then even talking about our own experience, and Trip talking about talking about Chad and these resonances that we have, and just kind of retracing our steps to how we got here because Lord of the Rings, but how that emotion was inspired by Tolkien's reading of Beowulf. And so how how reading Beowulf isn't just like an arbitrary exercise in being super nerdy, which it can be that, but totally. It's but there's looking in the text and looking at Beowulf and seeing where this comes from and saying, like, oh man, like the reason why I love Lord of the Rings so much is partly due to Beowulf and other Old English texts. And so could you, we obviously it was very important to Tolkien on a professional level and on a personal level, and an artistic level, but just, I don't know, maybe bring up experiences from being a teacher and how maybe you've got some medievalists, some English students who are like, I'm not into the nerd thing, but Beowulf seems cool. And they're like, I'm into Tolkien now, or vice versa. So just how important is that?
It's interesting. So I'm a medievalist first and foremost, but and I started using Tolkien as a gateway course to get students into the Middle Ages, into the medieval, right? Because I taught a course called Tolkien's Cauldron of Story. And so my students are like, oh, it's Tolkien, and it's Tolkien's Cauldron of Story. And they get into class because they didn't check the syllabus before they registered. And they're like, Beowulf, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, Chaucer, Snorri Sturluson's Prose Edda, the Ankrana Rule, and then all the way up to the Grimm's Fairy Tales and Lord Dunsany and William Morris. But yeah, like students are like, this is the first half of this course is all medieval. I'm like, yeah. And this is why you like Tolkien, because this is what, Sir Orfeo, Tolkien loved these things. And so it really did work. Yeah. I have to say, if I can say one thing about, because I say this to my students, I'll be honest here too. I would love to write a translation, to do my own translation of Beowulf. I feel like I have it in me. It would not be this. It would not be his, right? He is like a father to me, like a surrogate father. I swear to God, in many ways, a remote one, but still. But I am my own man now and my own interpreter, and I would do a very different interpretation. And very different stylistically. I would make very different choices, and I would make different choices when it comes to diction as well. But I do love this, but I would do a very different thing.
We've got people in the chat saying write it. So I think people are now going to expect your translation, Chris.
Oh, I would love that. Okay, give me about 6 years. I think I have it if I start soon.
Do you think that there's a like when it comes to something like Beowulf, and you're doing people are doing translations, right? And then there is the whole politics of translation, because at any time you're translating something, you obviously, the Old English hasn't changed, but what we know about that historical context has changed. The kinds of questions we bring to that historical context changes. Yes. The kind of questions the reader are going to bring, the translator brings, the communities of all these kinds of things are there. And I find it fascinating when individuals in some parts of their lives are completely aware that it's interpretation all the way down. And, so we should probably just give lots of money to get our favorite interpreters in charge of the Supreme Court so it can mean what we want it to mean, right? Like that it is just an act of power interpretation.
Yeah, it is. It absolutely is.
And other times people are like, no, this is what it really means. And what they underneath that is this anxiety that well, not all the time, but often, and especially when in the classroom, I hear that so often as an anxiety that once the kind of play of difference among the language comes out and all the interpreters and things, then the text can no longer be the seat of authority, and you have to take responsibility as the reader and the interpreter for the power that's being used in the text. Yeah. And I wonder if like, how would you compare as someone who looking at how students wrestle with Beowulf to maybe the internet and everyone arguing over Tolkien, to just like in the public square, religious text, be it any of the historic wisdom traditions? It only takes about 2 weeks into a semester in any religious tradition to know that is clear as the sacred may have been in writing it, it still works with humans. So it becomes an exercise of power and interpretation. What are the connection points you see? Or do people relate to different kinds of stories differently? And do you have advice for those of us that want to take seriously the exercise of power and interpretation, and in a way where we're honoring that kind of liminal space rather than trumpeting up a tradition, be it religious, historic, or Tolkien, for our own ends?
That's great. That's a great question. I mean, just the invitation to accept diversity, right? To allow for diversity of opinion, I think is huge, right? That we can feel like, yes, I believe this to be true, but it's that whole thing with religion and politics, right? I believe this to be true, but do I know it to be true for certain, right? Very unlikely. And so just to be able to allow for other differing opinions and interpretations, I think is huge. And not to really get heated and angry. I do not respond to people who get and people have gotten very upset at me. There's a YouTube video of someone sort of pokes fun at my interpretations. And I don't care, I don't see them doing any better work, or offering any better interpretations. They're just sort of pulling down other people. And that, if that's their fun, I guess. You're right about power too. And what is interesting, and I think happily, there are more women in academia, there are more people of color, there are more queers in academia, for example. And this does really cause tremendous anxiety for some people. But thankfully, we're given a space to voice differing interpretations of the text, and I do want to say that Beowulf now is just on the cusp of where Chaucer criticism was 60 years ago, right? Chaucer was too high and noble a literature. He was untouchable as an author for anyone to suggest that maybe he was making body or sexual references, or that Chaucer would be sexual at all. Right? And today we're like, what are you? Of course, it's everywhere in the text. He's laughing his ass off. And you know what? And this is where Tolkien and I disagree. To me, the Beowulf poet is laughing his ass off a lot, right? All the time, with the jokes and the wordplay, having a great time with it, and being body. And yes, having Hrothgar potentially come out of Wealhtheow's chamber with Maidenhosen, right? With women's hosiery, and laughing at that, right? And maybe winking and laughing, because maybe there are men in that culture who, of course, might have cross-dressed, and masculinity in monastic cultures is already fascinating and kind of queer. So anyway, so I think we really need to see the Beowulf poet as a human being, sexual, maybe a woman, right? We can't assume it was a man. Maybe queer, maybe a man into men, or a woman into woman, or we don't know, right? But definitely there's a lot there that suggests a lot of humor and a lot of body sexual jokes. This person was not above it at all.
So being a part of that work, Chris, like where you are kind of shedding some light on some misreadings that we could just miss out on the text for Beowulf as well as Tolkien. You're kind of occupying both of those spaces, and as you've done work to uncover some of those little nuggets of goodness and things that are pretty cool, and just even as a personal investment in your own enjoyment, not just as a professional, but like and as we've talked about all these cultural implications on interpretation, like, do you see your involvement in, as you see scholarship and fandom and people and the increase of readers and the type of readers that come to these texts, like, do you like, I don't know, does it invoke any sort of hope for you that maybe other things maybe don't?
That what gives me hope? What the I'm sorry, I lost the it there. Like the freedom to interpret Beowulf and Tolkien as I wish.
Yeah, and maybe just seeing your own work and seeing maybe the fruits of your labor, as well as other people who do that, fans and scholars and things like that.
Yeah, it does give me hope, right? And it doesn't preclude, there are many other readings alongside ours that are happening all the time, and I invite them, and I don't think they're wrong. Well, okay, all right. So I'll think they're wrong in that I think mine is right, but I don't think they're wrong for making that interpretation or for arguing it, right? And I'm often easily compelled. Like, I'll read someone's essay, like, God, that sounds really great. I'm kind of compelled by that, and then I'll look at my essay. Oh yeah, wait, I'm right. Yeah, totally. Like, this is. But I'm kind of mutable that way in some ways. Like, I see your point is one of the things that I say often. My friends call me out on it all the time. I say that a lot. I see your point, because I do. And I think that's a great thing to be able to do, is see other people's points. And it's kind of schizophrenic in a way, right? That you can sort of flip and be like, yes, in this sort of constellation of concepts and thoughts, this makes total sense. Flip it around, totally, the same, maybe the same concept, the same stars, right? But a different constellation is drawn up out of those points of light, and you're like, I see this very differently, but and that's okay. Yeah, I hope maybe I'm answering your question. As
No,
far as
that
hope,
totally. No, go ahead. Keep going. Keep going.
as far as hope, like, yeah, it does give me hope that more people are allowed to make these interpretations, and we, because there's been a little gatekeeping, obviously, in Beowulf studies and medieval studies and Tolkien studies, and so it's nice to, when we have the power, let's call it what it is, to voice these different interpretations.
Do you think there, Paul Ricoeur, philosopher, does lots in hermeneutics and stuff, made this observation once that really stuck with me, that he said that part of the West, after religion came to be shaped by imperialism, is that it sought interpretations that were true rather than beautiful. And beauty is not competitive in the same way that truth is. And I found that to be really helpful in, like, with either teaching philosophy classes where you're looking at multiple religious traditions and then kind of like aesthetically religious expressions of secular culture, but also in teaching, like, I taught a seminar on the history of interpretation of the Sermon on the Mount. I mean, it's literally Jesus's greatest hits. And only thing you get if you look at a couple thousand years of interpreting it is everyone still argues about it. They think they're right, and that everyone else was wrong, right? And so otherwise there'd be a whole lot more people on the planet that think loving your enemy and not judging are essential features of the Christian life. But there is a sense that our natural state in the West is one that claims of power or claims of interpretation or claims of truth are always shaped by truth with some kind of capital T, singularity, logic of the one, that, the logocentrism bit that Derrida, is playing against. And if we open it up to an aesthetic, or kind of theopoetics, if you're thinking about the divine, then you can recognize beautiful expressions of all sorts of different schools of reading, right? Nice. I joke regularly when in theological context, there's the chance I would end up a Thomist is about 0, but if you are one, I know which is the most beautiful, and and so those are the ones that get assigned. I mean, do you think that shift actually helps? Because, like, here's the sideways of asking. When I think of what's going to happen in Rings of Power, I don't think I'm looking for the truth. And if you're going in looking for a show that has little bit of access to a few things, and they can't even do the Silmarillion, and you're hoping that the Second Age is told truthfully to Tolkien, you're just going to be bitter, kind of like a fundamentalist, because no one else preaches like your favorite pastor. But if you're thinking, like, is it beautiful? Then, well, do they take seriously the deep reservoir of stories? Are they taking the character seriously, the legacy of it? Like, are they telling it in a way that's compelling and fits for the medium? And is it enjoyable? And mostly, does it talk my teenager into reading Lord of the Rings again with me? Those are the kind of questions, and that's the beauty question is so different than a truth one, that it's ultimately liberating for the reader and the interpreter. But it also means they're now responsible for doing it themselves, as opposed to, regurgitating the correct truth correctly.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. That's beautifully said. It really is. Absolutely. Yeah, and it's nice to be able to expand what the idea of what is beautiful, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
because there can be kind of what's the word I'm thinking of? Not kind of hegemony around that, but it's not really the precise word I'm looking for. Right, but we need to expand that idea of what is beautiful, and minoritized voices do that, and female voices do that, and people of color and queers. So I think that's really cool.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, definitely. So one of the questions that we kind of got excited and sidetracked that we've asked everyone was, and as someone that gets to teach Tolkien regularly, when you're reading it, again, is there a passage that when you know it's coming, the affective response begins early, where it's coming up, and Chris is like, "Oh, I know what's about to happen. It's coming," and you have to decide: am I going to go to bed and save it for tomorrow, or am I going to have to deal with it? You know, the Tolkien passage where you're like, "Oh, I pity the heart that is not moved when they get here."
Right. Yes. Right. Okay. There's a number of those. Right. And so you're talking about when I know it's coming. So I know the passage is coming. And I've had this numerous times. Right. I love reading out loud, first of all, and there's nothing better than teaching because I have a captive audience. I can read out loud. You know, I wait about 3 seconds. I'll say, "Does anyone want to read this passage?" 1, 2, 3. Good. No one does. All right. I don't give them a chance, basically, because I mean that's not true. I try to let them have some moments to read the text, but I really do love it. So and of course it's drama. It's beautiful drama, right? And you hope that the students are absolutely moved. It's one of the reasons that I'm there, right, is to move them and to have them feel that literature can move their hearts, right, as well as their minds, and that they walk out of that classroom a little more open, receptive to the magical, to the fairy, in Tolkien's term, the fairy, where the sort of the dust of the familiar is sort of blown off of things. He describes that in an essay on Smith of Wootton Major, that fairy can have that sort of ability of sort of just clearing the dust of familiarity off of the mundane. And so you hope that students walk out of your classroom feeling that.
I know, but you got to pick a passage, at least one. Come on, Chris. Like next time I read through Lord of the Rings,
I mean,
which passage or moment is going to make? I'm going to be like, oh, I know it's coming. This is Chris's favorite.
Yes, my favorite is Gimli's description of the caverns of Helm's Deep. I read this
It's so good.
It is so exquisite. It's beautiful. And homoamorous, because in this scene he gets so caught up. We should almost read it if we had the time. He gets so caught up in describing the beautiful the sort of the mirrored lakes and the pillars of the caverns of Helm's Deep, and he calls out Legolas's name 6 times. And lights, Legolas, there should be lights. And he's just off. He's just gone. He's just like experiencing the beauty of those all over again, like fresh, with Legolas, or wanting Legolas. And then he has to bring Legolas there, which kind of consummates their beautiful friendship, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, well, so if you've only seen the movies, this is one of the great reasons to go read the books, because at the Battle of Helm's Deep, Gimli gets trapped in the mines, like behind Helm's Deep, and they don't know if he's alive, right? And Legolas is all worried and stuff, and then they find him, and he's like just been dominating orcs and getting stuck behind the wall. But then he sees, the mines, and he goes through this beautiful description, and like even you saying it reminds me, like when you ask your friend, hey, like when you're in graduate school, what's your dissertation on? And then they say, well, like a middle Heideggerian understanding of the flow of existence, read through some kind of late medieval poetry that he was into in a couple lectures. And you're like, oh, really? That sounds fascinating. Could you tell me about it? Trip. You won't believe this, and you realize that whatever, like the thread of life that ran through their whole body, they're blowing up. And they're like, my week just got better because you said, tell me about it. Right. And the response of Legolas in that passage, like you hinted at it, but if you don't know, this is in the book too. What does Legolas do at the end of their whole journey? They're like, we're going to leave together. They're going to go into the woods with there, because that's where Legolas wanted to go, to see the old woods and all this kind of stuff. And they're going to go back to the mines. Yeah. And what are they doing? They've promised that if we survive impending death, we're going to go to places that give this other deep joy. Yeah. Why? Because we get to share it with them. Yeah. Oh, come on. Come on. You telling me you don't want a Gimli or a Legolas? And that is not in the movie. Because why? We got sliding down like a extreme games and counting kills and being the comic relief, which I get. It's great for middle school boys to get them to read the book. But I'm just saying, if you haven't read that passage,
yes, it really is beautiful. I read it at least twice a year to my students. You know, whenever I have an option or plan to, I read it to them. It's really, really beautiful. You know, yeah. Because he's really working hard to get his close friend to understand him too.
Yeah.
Right. Because, and I won't do it justice right now, but Legolas will say, you know, better that we not tell, you know, people about it. And, you know, a whole family of dwarves might mar the stone. And Gimli's like, no, you do not understand, right? We would not quarry this stone. We would tend these stones, right? Like tending to a garden, right? Tap by tap every day. I'm gonna ruin it right now. Just beautiful. Read it, everybody, please, and read it.
And it kind of reminds me of our conversation of interpretation. And I think that how, like you said, Legolas is like, if it's so beautiful, why would you change it? And Gimli's like, because it's my canvas. When I look at this and I can have a conversation with it and make it beautiful and then share it with others. And I think that what we're doing with these interpretations and why Tolkien just has all these multitudes and why it's just never going to stop, you know, and where we just look at it and we're like, we want to share you this passage from Lord of the Rings because what it's done to my life and what it continues to do for me.
Nice. Absolutely.
It's like the reason Gimli would know dwarves wouldn't mess it up is because he knows what they love. And if you have a deep love for something, then you have a different kind of permission than if you haven't. And I think the best narratives are ones where you trust people that love it, because as long as you don't think a single version of it's final, then what a lover does with a story they care deeply about can resonate in all sorts of ways you don't anticipate.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, there are a few moments in the movies that, because of the way they redo them, that end up being like really beautiful that aren't in the books. And I mean, they're nothing quite like them, but you know, it's because it's different medium, because they have to rework some of the different parts of the stories because they couldn't make a 28-hour movie. But you know, but if you really love it, then you recognize why Tom Bombadil is one of the most essential elements and is a wonderful character, and that to cut him out would be quite ridiculous.
Yes, it's quite sad. We've yet to really get to see him cinematically. That's a shame. Someday, some brave person will do that.
But have you thought about who you would cast as Tom Bombadil? Because I have an idea, but if y'all like, I've thought about it. Someone in the class, because Jason, who's not here, who has normally been here, this is a funny bit. He got a new dog, and this dog apparently has a sheer terror towards his other dog, and he drove it from Virginia, like DC, back to Arkansas, where he got the dog. But he does not like. He's like, I don't get the whole Tom Bombadil thing, so I kind of bring him up regularly just to shame him, as a friend does. But the but Tom Bombadil, I think, is if he was going to be in a movie, and because the Lord of the Rings ones, they did the filming where the size of the actor didn't determine the size of the character.
Right.
I think Jack Black would be quite the awesome Tom Bombadil.
Interesting. You know, if I squint right now, Trip, you kind of got this Jack Black kind of look to you. I think you got it.
when I lived in LA, one time when the Prop 8 stuff was going on, I was doing my PhD in Los Angeles then, and the Prop 8 musical with Jack Black playing Jesus, and I had long hair and a beard. Then I got pictures taken by the paparazzi, and they were like, "You're Jack Black." I was like, "I'm not. I'm absolutely not Jack Black. That's not my name." And they were like, "That's exactly what he would say." And there was about a week that people
I could see it.
Shared a picture. Now, now.
Yeah. I would, to answer your question, because now you just made me think of it, and I'm going to have fun with this one. I'm just going to have fun with it. Derek Jacobi, you know him? British actor. He's actually in the Tolkien biopic, the Fox Searchlight biopic. He plays Joseph Wright in the movie, and he's done a lot of great things.
Oh yeah.
Recently, he has been in a British sitcom called Vicious, where he and Sir Ian McKellen, it's Sir Derek Jacobi, by the way, the two of them play these bitter old queens who are in love with each other. They've been in love for like 40 years, and they're just really bitter towards each other. They're vicious, but they're so hilarious, and you can tell they're so in love. Anyway, now that you said it, because Sir Ian McKellen is Gandalf, and I can picture him because he wants to spend time with Bombadil, because he's been doomed to rolling, and Bombadil has been, like sort of gathering moss, if you will. But anyway, I could see Derek Jacobi being a very flamboyant. I would love it, actually. I would love him to lean into that. Sort of very flamboyant Bombadil. I think that'd be great.
Oh, and he was Gracchus in Gladiator.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. I'm like, yeah, what was the movie he was in? And this past summer we went to Rome. We went all over Europe with the family. So I rewatched like any of the big movies related to Rome with the teenager. And when that movie came out, I watched Gladiator in the theater about 10 times.
Nice.
With all my neighborhood friends.
Yeah.
The same ones we rolled D20s with and played role-playing games. So
yay. You would love Derek Jacobi maybe in and I'm trying to remember the name. Am I blanking on it right now? He has a series. He had a series. He was much younger, where he played a monk who was a detective, and he would solve crimes very much like Sherlock Holmes.
Wow.
And what's it called? If anyone knows, they can throw it on the board. But it's medieval. It's set in medieval times, and he's a medieval monk, like in the 13th century.
The 13th Apostle?
No, something like Aldred or Medred. We would need to. Maybe I could find it really quickly.
This is one of those times where if you weren't on my screen, IMDb would be really helpful. Falsified.
What is that?
The IMDb.
What is that? Oh yeah. Yes.
Where it lists all their.
I'm gonna look at it.
Vicky says Chris Rock for Tom Bombadil. That would be pretty funny.
Cadwell, yes. Okay. Sorry. Go ahead. Sorry.
No. I was just thinking of Chris Rock doing Tom Bombadil.
Nice.
I mean, when he does the 13th Apostle in that's what the reference of 13th Apostle was in Dogma. Chris Rock is the 13th Apostle, and he's bitter that he gets cut out of the New Testament. Which Dogma is one of my favorite movies of all time.
That was set near my hometown in Red Bank, New Jersey. So
You're near Red Bank?
Yes, Asbury Park is where. But yeah.
So in 2008, when I started Homebrewed Christianity, how we started, my buddy Chad, who I told you all about earlier, was like, I was doing these like theology and philosophy reading groups at a bar, and he's like, I started interviewing the authors of the books we were reading because no one actually reads before class. I don't know why. I didn't know that was an option. And and so I'd interview them and put them on rewritable CDs and hand them to everyone. So like next month they would listen to me interview them. And he's like, you should start a podcast. And I'm like, what's that? I hate the internet. I have a Heidegger interpretation of technology. And he's like, Kevin Smith has one. You like his movies? I was like, all right, I'll think about it. So the Kevin Smith via Chad explaining the podcast was what eventually talked me into starting it.
Oh, wow.
So,
wow. Very cool. Yeah, those are great movies.
Oh, yeah. The not related to Tolkien, but Kevin Smith had this whole bit. The one time I got to hang out with him, like, one of like 20 people interviewing him for a junket. He explained that his relationship to Christianity was like Han Solo, and it was the funniest thing I'd ever seen. He was like, well, I grew up with a bunch of people that were really into it, and I'm not really that force sensitive, but I'm totally down for the morals and the stories, and I love stories. Plus, it's always theatrical. They have incense and costumes on Sundays. Like, who's going to turn this down? And it was going through this whole bit. He's like, but kind of like Han Solo. Like, I'm not force sensitive, but if you are and just need me to shoot the back of Vader's bus so you can do something really cool and stop impending destruction, I'm down for it. And I was like, that is a whole genre of how to be religious that needs to there needs to be an option. The Han Solo.
Nice. That's great. A Han Solo approach, right? Never tell me the odds.
Yes. So when you're thinking of all the questions and the public conversation, and then like teaching the class again with a TV show running, what are do you have a big fear or hope for Rings of Power?
I have a hope for it. I mean, I'm hopeful anyway. My expectations are low in a way, but I am hopeful that they seem to have definitely put a lot of money into it. I think it's going to be beautiful. From what I've seen, I'm sure I'm going to disagree with things. I disagreed with Lord of the Rings. There's a section I call the Faramir debacle, and it will always be that to me.
Oh, yes.
I'm sure
Yes.
there's going to be debacles going forward with this, but I'm still hopeful that they're going to, that they're really trying to do a good job and to make it something beautiful, So, and it's going to be great. Let's be honest, it's great. It's great for classes. The students they've been invigorated. There hasn't been really a lowering of the momentum and energy in Tolkien at the university. But I can only imagine that like now, like in 2012, 13, 14, there'll be a bit of a bump again as students just get into more into it. So that's always nice. And we'll have a lot to say to each other because of those episodes. So
now, as someone that loves the bit in Two Towers where Gimli describes the mines.
Yes.
When as someone that likes that passage as well, when I saw the first bit of Moria in its splendor in one of the trailers, I was like, oh, pause, sit. Yeah. And my son made fun of me. He's like, Dad, you're pausing a trailer to look at the interior of Moria. I was like, yes, I am. He's like, you should have recorded yourself. It would have been a funny YouTube that you're crying at a picture of a dwarf mine. And I was like, thank you. Thank you for helping me.
Yeah, right.
Oh, Nick, did you say something?
I did not say anything, but
you did your head thing, and I'm like, you're always so timid. I didn't want you not to say what you were going to say.
No. I mean, like I said, I have the two trees on the background of my computer and my phone for when the first image was released. So I think we all feel a certain sort of way.
Yes.
Awesome. All right. So I have one more question, and Nick, if you have your final question, go for it. But I'll ask mine first. Okay. So when you mentioned you mentioned in your lecture briefly some of the themes that run through Beowulf and run through Lord of the Rings. And in particular, there are a number of questions asked that were all around the relationship of defeat and death and how that shapes both stories. And I feel like that's like the biggest softball. But like, what would you do for people? There were a number of questions around this that were asking, like, how does that vision, the moral landscape of Beowulf around defeat, death, and such get picked up and set the frame again in Tolkien's Middle Earth?
I forget who wrote the essay. Was it Goldberg? Well, I better not. Anyway, other minds have treated this before, and so when we think of Beowulfian culture, we think of Anglo-Saxon England, early medieval England. What comes to mind first and foremost is Rohan and that culture, and they speak Old English. Tolkien's using Old English words for everything. And they do, there's definitely something about that. I mean, there is something Beowulfian, and you're right, in that kind of ethos of that Germanic, Northern Germanic, Northwestern Germanic, Norse, and Anglo-Saxon culture that's pervasive throughout the Silmarillion and the Lord of the Rings, in their attitude towards kind of fighting the long defeat, right? Some other scholars have pointed out that what Tolkien kind of does is, particularly with Rohan, kind of has that kind of grim, almost darker quality to it, and attitude. And yet Tolkien is going to, because for Tolkien, as a Christian, as a devout Catholic, as someone who finds eucatastrophe to be super important and imminent in his own sort of spiritual experience, eucatastrophe, right, being the term that Tolkien coined for a sudden turning away from catastrophe towards an unexpected victory, right? The eagles are coming, the eagles are coming, the eagles are coming. Look for me on the third day, says Gandalf, right? And he's there. And so Tolkien sort of takes that sort of grim Germanic tenor and alters it, and gives it this sort of what Tolkien defines as sort of a Christian eucatastrophic quality, and in a way kind of completes what Tolkien wanted the Beowulf poet maybe to do, right? The Beowulf poet seems to be someone who kind of idolizes and kind of has this nostalgic love for one's pagan past, but who was a Christian, but the poet does not alter it to conform to a kind of Christian eucatastrophic paradigm, but Tolkien does, right? Tolkien will take the kind of Beowulf culture as close as he is willing to, and he gets really close with Rohan and the Theodred and saying goodbye to him, the Lamentations there, and then he gives this more eucatastrophic Christian cast to that very Beowulfian culture, ultimately through Éomer and Éowyn, and their marriages at the end, and so what was going to be a very grim story of Éowyn dying, which she was supposed to do in the draft, which she does do in the draft. Éowyn doesn't die; she gets married. Éomer doesn't die, though he's ready to. He sings and he's ready for death, right? But there's marriages and whatnot, and anyway, maybe I'm getting astray from this. I'll stop there.
No, I think that's great. I think there's this movement from like these monocultures that we get this, like you're talking about, there's this integration of diversity and merging of just, and we don't know what's coming into the fourth age. We know a little bit, and we know that there's some decline, but because of this good ending, this eucatastrophic moment in the Lord of the Rings, that there's hope for the future, for the fourth age, to a certain degree.
To a certain degree, right? There is hope, right? Well, it's going to lead to our age. I'm not sure how much.
The long defeat.
Yeah, sometimes feels that way, but again, I'm an optimist. I am. So,
Chris, it's been super fun. Trip gave me a last question, but I think that I read some of your articles, and I just read the one that you did in Tolkien on Alterity with Saruman, and I think that you're a fun person to talk to. Your scholarship is equally fun to read, as well as just getting all the good tidbits out of it, that you just do such good digging, where you're like, dang, and I just don't want people to miss out. So where can people find some of your work so they can get there, and even maybe some stuff that you got coming up? Besides your Beowulf translation.
Right. That does need to happen. Honestly, it does. And I'm working on a book right now that's dealing with Beowulf, mostly all on Beowulf. There's this whole Saruman thing I find really fascinating, and there's three. That argument is a long argument, and it's so long that I needed to break it up into 3 essays. So one is in Mythlore, the Mythlore Journal, and it's called Morning Stars of a Setting World. And that's where I look at the Neoplatonic mythopoeia of Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, and a work called The Complaint of Nature by Alain de Lisle, which was a 12th century Neoplatonic text. And I look at all the connections, and Tolkien would have anyway. So first argument is in Mythlore, the Morning Stars of a Setting World. And then the second part of that argument, where I really focus on Saruman, is what you were talking about, Tolkien, the Tolkien and Alterity book, where I talk about Saruman and his sort of sodomitic resonances, which I think are absolutely there. And then the third component of that is something I'm going to publish hopefully next year, early on, in a collection of essays that I'm editing along with Robin Reed and Stephen Yandel, called Queer Tolkien. And that's sort of like the final conclusion of a long argument, where I'm just sort of looking at the what Saruman meant to Tolkien early on, where he thought he should be pardoned and maybe just become a trickster or a joker figure, to ultimately this near like vampire death, where he is just this skull covered in rags that sort of deteriorate before our very eyes in the most horrific death scene that I can remember, really. And so why, right? I'm questioning why. What is this character? What are the anxieties and fears around what Saruman represents that would make Tolkien, at the very last minute of publishing The Lord of the Rings, like the last minute in the galley proofs, make a change and add that very horrific description to this character? So I think there's a lot there that we might need psychology. I'm not a psychologist, but I won't say. But there's a lot there. Anyway, so thank you for asking. That's yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you tons for hanging out with us. It's been a blast. It makes me think
way too much fun.
That if we were neighbors, I'd be really grateful. And
me too.
But yeah, it was so much fun, and I'm kind of jealous of your students next semester. They're going to have all the excitement of the text and the cultural questions, where if they learn it, they get to impress their family at Thanksgiving break. They're like, yeah, I'm taking a Tolkien class, friends. Right. Yeah, pretty awesome.
Thank you, guys. This has been wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Joy. And thank you. And your questions have been great. And the questions I see on the board are also wonderful. So thanks.
Excellent.
For a great experience.
All righty. Well, you have a wonderful evening. And all of you listening, you do as well.
Everyone gets to see the tattoo. Right?
Oh, let's go.
Hold on. I'm going to put you big screen so they can see it better. All right, there you go.
Right. Iala Arendel Engla Bergtost is what it says on the top. That's Old English from the Christ poem. And it was translated into Aya Arendel Elenian Ankalima, which is, of course, what we have when in Shelob's lair. And this is the standard of the House of Arendelle with the Silmaril right there. So you got some Old English and Elvish.
Nice.
Oh my gosh. Chris,
Nice.
you have to, I mean, you don't have to, but please send us a picture because we need to share that with the group. The people, the class people who weren't here, weren't able to join us in the live stream. Need to see that because that is epic.
That's great. I could do that. All right, guys.
Awesome.
Have a good night.
All right. Thanks, Chris. Oh, yeah. That was fun. That was fun.
Gosh. Man, and we got a glimpse of Chris Vaccaro's secret Arendelle tattoo. I don't know if it's secret, but it was secret to me until just.
Well, now it's out in the open. It's out in the open. Yeah. Thank you for everyone hanging out. This has been a blast. I'm real excited about Steven joining next week because his commentary during the John Garth thing was pretty fun. Also, someone asked, will there be any videos from Theology Beer Camp? Yes. Oh, there's actually a video crew that'll be there. Which ones we shared live? That's a different shared, publicly it's a different thing. But we'll definitely record the Lord of the Rings or Rings of Power soiree and some of the other super nerd podcasts the nerdy ones that aren't specifically theology and philosophy related. All the people that are into it will participate. Which anyone that wants to come use the code Tolkien, you can get $50 off theologybeer.camp. Is the secret, is it safe? Quality call. So Nick.
Yeah.
Reading the passage, I already started crying again. I already started. I cried when I read it earlier today. This is now I'm supposed to. So those of you that don't know, in like 30 minutes, I'm doing a book release party for a friend in Los Angeles or Santa Barbara, California. There's a new book, The God Who Riots, coming out. I'm doing a live stream, so I got to go get like pumped up in a different way.
Yeah,
I feel
totally.
I feel like I just wanted me, you, and Chris just have a big old man hug.
Oh, seriously. Just even like what Chris was talking about Tolkien being like his surrogate father. Like even in the lecture, I was like, I want Chris to be my dad. Like I want to have I want him to be the relative where I go over, hug, and I'm like, what you been reading? Please read The Lord of the Rings out loud to me, Chris. Like, I mean, even when you were reading the passage that we talked about with Sam, I mean, you just hear it's when you hear stuff like Tolkien read out loud, it just resonates differently, and it hits you. It hits you.
Yeah. Okay. So if you're on the stream and you have a passage from the Legendarium, anything Tolkien wrote Middle Earth related, that just like pops you, then email me, because I think we should
that'd be so great.
Do a few readings. We bring them up, and we got to make sure Steven next week knows we want to read the passage.
Yeah, I will. I'll reach out to Steven to make sure that he knows we're going to maybe read some stuff and maybe even bring his own.
Yeah, because he had slides and everything in his lecture, which, by the way, if you've only listened to the audio, you want to go watch the video for his, because he straight up like has diagrams and pictures and junk.
Also, I just want to say Steve did that lecture with COVID. Like he came back and tested positive for COVID and put together that lecture still because he's a badass.
So that was like that was a like partial strength. Anyway,
yeah,
but no, I'm serious. I would love to hear everyone's like those passages where they're like, oh, and you can either send the actual passage or like the part of the book or whatever reference. It's not going to be hard for us to find it. Now I've unpacked my books, so now I have multiple versions available,
dude, including your sweet Folio Society.
Yeah, which is holding up my computer currently because my podcasting desk is not at an optimal video height. So, but no, I would love to read more passages, and I had like 7 or 8 answers to that question, so I figure but I want to know what the most popular ones are. So if we get them, then we can like,
I think yours is one. I want to gather them all because you did talk, because I'm here's where I'm putting my money on. It's all going to be, the most popular is going to be stuff related to Sam and Frodo. I think yours, like with the story, and then when they're in Mordor and they see the star, the Eärendil star, and they find hope and they get the water, and they basically pray to Galadriel and the Starfile.
But what about when Gimli, Merry, and Pippin are discussing how to smoke a pipe? That's also one of my favorite passages.
Oh, it's so good.
And if you have friends that you smoke pipes, like let's say when you were a campus minister at the University of North Carolina, you had a Tolkien group at a pipe store, like me, and like you get to those passages and it just makes you think of all the people that were like, I'm 19. I definitely bought a jacket with leather elbow patches and went to the Tolkien group at the Pipe and Pint, which is the name of the store. And
you're trying to look like Giles from Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Check this out. Version number 2 of the old Toby blend. This is for at Theology Beer Camp. We're going to have a picture of all the Tolkien heads at Theology Beer Camp. And Pipe and Pint, I've gone over a few times. We're working on a tobacco blend. I just got this today, blend number 2. It has 6 different Virginia tobaccos in it. And it is a little bit of Cavendish. And one of them has like just enough aromatic flavor on it that if you haven't smoked pipes before or new, it all lightens it up. So there's not Perique or Latakia in it. So it's like mild to medium, nice thick smoke. Rock some smoke rings while I was reading the passage we read out loud today, but also Chris's articles that we had. Anyway.
And just thinking about being there, and one of the things that's cool about that Gimli and Merry and Pippin is that Gimli doesn't have his pipe. He broke it. He lost it. And Merry and Pippin are like, yo, we got a spare, homeboy. And Gimli is like, I am indebted to you for the rest of my life, because the pipe community, the culture, it goes that deep.
Yeah.
Where it's equivalent to saving your life.
Well, I will sanitize and bring all 6 of my pipes to beer camp. So I will share. You don't get to keep it. But if you haven't, but any Tolkien heads that are there, they need to have a picture smoking the old Toby blend. And if you are a pipe smoker, I think I'm just getting like a pound of it so everyone can take some in a little baggie home, because what's better after beer camp than selfie smoking your pipe holding your Tolkien?
Nothing.
Maybe eschatological banquet, but still,
that could be part of it. I've heard you talk MXPX playing in the background. Chris reading his favorite passage, Tooth and Nail.
I got my Tooth and Nail tea on.
Like that, just pipes with your friends.
Yeah,
eating a Hobbit quality meal.
There you go. All right, everyone. It's been a blast. We'll see you next week. And if you want to come smoke pipes with us after we watch the last episode of Rings of Power, you can come to Theology Beer Camp. Otherwise, you can hear it on the internet. So, all righty.
Yeah.
Peace.